Third and final video for Yeush Shelo Mida'at. 6 proof to try to get an answer on who is correct. This one is going to try to prove Rava right. So for this, a little introduction on the mitzvah of leket. The mitzvah of leket, kasher kotzer, when the harvester chatach et hadagan, when he cuts his grain, im yesh shnayim shenofel miyado kasher hu chotech, when if 2 pieces of grain fall, HaTorah oseto lekabel u'harim et ma shenafal. The Torah does not allow us to pick up the 2 or 1 pieces of grain that fell. You must leave it for the poor. If it's 3 or more, he is allowed to pick it up. So this proof is going to speak about the concept of leket. Says the Gemara, Tashma, me'ematai kol adam mutarim baleket. When is it that all people are allowed to keep the leket they find? So meaning, if there must be a time where after all the harvest is done, there's grain left over on the floor. Can regular people go and pick up the leket? Is it possible? And if it is possible, when is this time? When can regular people go take the leket? Because even the poor people give up hope. So the Gemara answers, when the rummagers go through the field. So meaning after after the rummagers go through the field, kol echad, every single Jew, lo rak ani, not just the poor people, yecholim lechapes, can search ulkachat hadagan baritzpa, and take all the grain that's on the floor once the rummagers go through. So the next few slides will explain who exactly these rummagers are. Who are rummagers, or who are these people? 2 opinions. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, debei de'azlei itiagra. Rabbi Yochanan says they are the elderly poor who walk with a cane. They go very slowly. They walk very carefully, and they see everything, and therefore they take whatever they can find because they walk very slowly. At that moment, Rabbi Yochanan says, once they pass through the field, it's now free for all. Anybody can come, even if you're not poor, because even the rest of the poor people give up hope. Rish Lakish Amar, Likutei Batal Likutei. Rummagers are the takers who come after the takers, which means like the second group of individuals, the second group of poor people that come through the field to take the grain that's on the floor. Once those guys go by, then now it's open, free for all for everybody. So now, Ve'amai. Why? Why does the leket become free for everybody? For you and me and the whole world. I understand that the local people of that city gave up hope because the rummagers went through. Makes sense. But there are poor people in other cities, other places who have not given up hope. They don't know that the rummagers went through our field. So what makes you think that the poor people of other cities are going to give up hope? Esber. Leket applies to all poor people in the world. Even though the people of this city gave up hope because the rummagers went through, it's not considered abandonment of hope for poor people that live outside of the city. From here we see that no knowledge is needed on behalf of the poor people that live outside of the city. We may then say that since the distant poor, the poor people that live outside of the city, would give up hope of finding any further leket if they knew that the nemushot, their Yeush, can be taken as law from now. So this is a case of Yeush Shelo Mida'at, because the people that don't live over there don't know, that don't live over here, people live abroad, they don't know that the nemushot have gone through. And yet, the Braita says that anybody can come and take it. That means if anybody can come and take it, that means it's Yeush Shelo Mida'at is Yeush, and therefore Rabba is right, because they have no doubt that the Nemushot went through. And yet the Braita says they're allowed to keep it, kind of like what Rabba does, like Rabba says. No, Hachashar Raya number 6, the Gemara says, no, this is not a good proof. Why? Amre, they said, Kevan deikanim hacha. Since what are the people in the abroad, the people in the other cities going to say? They're going to say, since there are poor people in this area, Hanach Meikra Yushem Mityaesh, the poor people who are more distant will give up hope from finding leket. They will say to themselves, the poor people of that city will certainly collect it all. Meaning, the people that live in another city are saying to themselves, listen, we have our own rummagers, okay? And they went through our city, probably went through their city as well. So you cannot say it's a case of Yeush Shelo Mida'at. It's not a case of Yeush Shelo Mida'at. There is that, because there's that of rummagers in their own city, and they're assuming that there's that, and they're assuming that there's rummagers in the next city where the grain is, and therefore this is not the case of Yeush Shelo Mida'at, and therefore we cannot prove Rabbi right. When the poor people of this city give up hope, so all the poor people in the world then give up hope, it's not a proof to Rabbah, and that's why the whole world, free for all, can now come and take the grain. Raya number 7, the 7th attempt at a proof. This time, finally, we're going to try to prove Abaye right, that lo haveyush. Here we're talking about a case if someone finds dried figs on the road. Ketziot baderech, someone finds cut dried figs in the road. And even those figs that were found beside a field of cut figs, okay, next to. So either they're found on the road or next to a field of figs. Or ken bechen te'ena hanotel aderech matzah tenim tachtea. Or you have a case of a fig tree that hangs over the road, and one found figs beneath it. So says the Braita, mutarot mishum gezel upturot min ha'maaser. A person that finds these figs on the road or underneath a tree, a branch of a tree that's leaning over a fence, you are allowed to keep them, and you don't have to give maaser on them because they are ownerless. Now, however, hazetimu b'charubim, with regards to olives and carobs, if you found them under the same conditions, meaning if you found olives underneath a branch of a tree hanging over a fence, or olives next on the road, or olives next to a field of olives, okay? Olives and carobs, asur, you're not allowed to keep them. So figs you are, olives and carobs you're not. Okay? Now, how does this prove Abaye right? So here we go. I understand why in the case of the figs does not contradict Abaye. Because since figs are valuable, the owner is constantly going to check on them, okay? And therefore, the person who finds them is not allowed to keep them. Okay? And therefore, right, he knows right away when it's lost, right? Therefore, a person is allowed, I take that what I said before back. A person is allowed to keep the figs because since they are valuable, he knows right away when they're lost, and therefore he gives up hope. So Abaye would hold, okay, and that it makes sense in that case why he would, why a person would be allowed to keep the figs. The fig tree too, we say that the owner is aware that the figs tend to drop from the tree, and he gives up hope, and therefore we understand why he's allowed to keep it. But according to Rabbah, the second part of the Braita, the part of the Braita that deals with the olives, contradicts Rabbah's opinion. The katani bazetimu b'charuvim asur. For it states, the Braita says that you're not allowed to keep the olives. Your finder cannot keep the olives. Why not? Lefi Rabbah, since the owner gives up hope, if he knows, once he knows that it's lost, why can't the owner keep the olives and the carobs? According to Rabbah, he should be allowed to keep the olives and the carobs. Why does the Braita say not so? This seems to contradict Abaye. This seems to contradict Rabbah, and if it contradicts Rabbah, it must be that Abaye is fine because the Braita makes sense according to Abaye. So this seems to prove to us, Yeush Shelo Mida'at, that Abaye is correct. Answer no. Amar Rabbi Abhu. Rabbi Abhu says in defense of Rabbah, Shani Zaid. The case of an olive tree is different. Why are olives different? Why can't the person keep olives? Because its appearance attests to its owner identity. A person sees an olive, he knows right away where it comes from. It comes from a certain tree, and this tree belongs to this person's field, and this is this man's olives. So that even though the olives drop to the ground, it's recognizable for the place of a person is that person. הזיתים שנמצאים במקום ניכרים שייכים לבעל המקום, אז הבעל חושב שהוא יכול לבוא ולקחת את הזיתים שנפל מן העץ. The owner himself is saying, hey, listen, I can describe these olives, these have my name all over it. Just by looking at the form of the olives, I can clearly say that these are mine. He's going to keep on looking for them. So even Rava would agree that they're not considered hefker, and that's why even Rava will say that a person is not allowed to keep the olives in this case. So it's not a disproof to Rava, and therefore it's not a proof to Abaye, and therefore we still don't have this proof to Abaye. Before that, the Gemara wants to say, wait a second. If so, that the fruit's appearance indicates to who it belongs, then we should say the same thing with the figs, right? Well, why is a person allowed to keep the figs then? Right? We could say also that the fig, we look at these figs, it belongs to a certain owner. Why does the Mishnah allow the finder to keep the figs? The answer is, because when a fig falls to the ground, or when a fig goes to the ground, it becomes unappealing, and therefore the owner, he's not going to come back and want to take those figs. So if a guy finds figs on the floor or in front of a fence or next to a road, he's allowed to keep it. Zetim v'charubim, however, the olives and carob that are more stronger perot, shomrim et erekam af acharei shenoflim, are able to keep their value even after they fall. Raya number 8 that proves that Rabbah is right is Yeush Tashma Haganav Shnatal Mizeh V'Natan Nazeh. If a thief took an object and then gave it to another person, V'chen Gazlan Shnatal Mizeh V'Natan Nazeh, or a robber, someone who steals openly, took from this person and gave it to another person, V'chen Yarden, or the Jordan River that swept away an object and it landed into someone else's field. In all these three cases, the Ganav, the Gazlan, and the Yarden, who took one object and brought it to another person, says the law, Mashinatan Natal, Mashinatan Natal. What it took, what it gave. The person who received the item from the robber is allowed to keep it, and the person who received the item from the river is also allowed to keep it. Why? It seems from here, obviously, maybe because the owner gave up hope. Now, Gemara says, I understand why, in the case of the Gazlan, the open robber, and the Yarden, the river, why the person's allowed to keep it, because obviously the guy gave up hope, because it was right in front of them, the owner sees him being taken away, and he gives up hope on recovering. So there is Yeush and there is that. But in the case of the thief, the concealed thief, the sneaky guy, so does the owner actually see him? He doesn't see him. He broke into his house in the middle of the night. So are we certain that he actually gave up hope? Yet, how does the Braita rule? The Braita rules that even in the case of a Ganav, where he doesn't see the Ganav, he doesn't see it being stolen from him, there is no doubt he is allowed to keep it. The guy who receives is allowed to keep it. Kan yesh Yeush aval en da'at. Mikevan she'Braita matira motze lishmor oto. Since the Braita allows the recipient to keep it, we see that that is not a necessity in this case, because he doesn't know. He doesn't see the Ganav steal it from him, and yet he's allowed to keep it. So Yeush Shelo Mida'at is Have Yeush, and he's allowed to keep it. This seems to prove Rabbah right. Gemara says, no, this Ganav, this what we think is a sneaky guy and a guy that's really, he's actually armed. He's right? So therefore, the owner is aware right away of the theft, and he gives up hope right away, and therefore, it's not a case of Yeush Shelo Mida'at, it's a case of Yeush Mida'at. He knows that it belongs. Gemara says, whoa, wait a second. You mean to tell me that this is a case of an armed robber? If that's the case, Ihachi Hainu Gazlan, that is the exact same situation as a Gazlan. Who is a Gazlan? A Gazlan is an open robber, a guy that comes in front of you. So therefore, now you're going to tell me that a Ganav, who we originally thought to be a concealed guy, a sneaky guy, is also now armed? So Gemara says, Trei Gavne Gazlan. There are two kinds of robbers. One of them is a person that here Gazlan number one is a person who will steal open without without a pistol, without a sword, without any type of weapon. Why? Because he's confident. Gazlan number two, who the Braita calls a ganav, is a person who steals, but he steals with a weapon because he's scared. In both cases, nevertheless, there is that. In the case of the first Gazlan, all right, he's an open robber. He's not afraid. He's not embarrassed because he's so confident. There is that. The owner does know it's lost. And in the second case, also as well. So this is not a case. This is not a proof to Rava, because in all three cases, the Ganav, the Gazlan, and the Yarden, there is dat, and therefore it's not a case of Yeush Shelo Mida'at. The last proof, Raya number 12. This is the last one we're doing, which is that proves Abaye. Tashma de Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel ben Yoyat Tzdak Minayin la'aveda sheshatfa nahar shehi muteret. How do we know that if an item was swept away by a flooding river is permitted to the one who finds it? How do we know that a person is allowed to keep an object if it got swept away by a river? So the pasuk says, that we learned a while ago, that in the Torah, that says that you have to return an object. You shall do to your friend. You have to return an object of your friend, whether it's your friend's donkey or his clothing and everything that he lost. Asher tovad mimen, things that is lost from him. What does it mean, things that is lost from him? Mi she'avuda hemenu u'tshiyah le'tekol ha'adam. Something that is lost to him, but it's still accessible to mankind. So, for example, if I lost my bag, okay, I lost it. However, the people around that are crossing my bag, they find it. It's accessible to them. So therefore, if they find my bag, they have to return it to me, because the pasuk says you only have to return it when it's mishnebad mimenu. It has to be lost from me, from that owner. Only from the owner and not from everybody else. In that case, you have an obligation to return it. However, Yatztazu, the exception to this case is she'avuda mimenu be'ena metzriyat lekol adam. A case of an object lost not only to me, but it's inaccessible to everyone, which means, right, when an item gets lost by a flooding river or some crazy natural disaster, okay, even if a person finds it, he's allowed to keep it, because not only is it lost to the original owner, it's inaccessible. The guy just happened to get lucky and it landed in his field. So he's allowed, he doesn't have to return it, because it's not just lost, asher tovad mimenu, it's not just lost to the owner himself, it's inaccessible to all mankind. So we learn that from implication. Now, Isura Dumya Dehetera. Now, we have two laws over here. We have the law of I lost my bag, right? And that's only lost to me. And then we have the law is I lost something that was lost in a flooded river. Now, the case of the object forbidden to the finder, which means you cannot keep my bag, you have to return it. It's very similar to the case that was lost by the flooding river. How are they compared to? The fact that they're both learned from the pasuk, that same pasuk, asher tovad mimen, that both of these laws are learned by the word asher tovad mimen. One of them is learned explicitly, and one of them is learned by implication. The case of my bag, that's learned explicitly. You have to return my bag because it's lost to me. Asher tovad mimen. You don't have to return something that was lost in a flooded river. Why? Because you only have to return something that was lost only to me. So, by implication, if something is lost to not only to me but to the rest of the world, you're allowed to keep it. So, being that these two laws are learned from the same pasuk, they must have something in common. There must be a law that has a commonality between them. What is that? So let's just read the summary. Therefore, even an object. So now here it is. Ma hetera ben deit pasimanu ben deleit pasiman shara. Just like an object that's permitted to the finder, an object carried by the flood, right? That's permitted to the person who finds it because it's lost to everybody. Just it's permitted him whether it has a siman or not. So too af isura. So to something that you're not allowed to keep You're not allowed to keep it ben de'it basiman, ben de'it basiman asura. Whether it has a siman, whether it doesn't have a siman, you're not allowed to keep it. Therefore, even an object without a siman may not be kept by the finder. Even though we learned that if the owner gives up hope, the finder can keep it. It must be that this pasuk Asher Tovad Mimenu has to be talking about a case that he doesn't know it's lost. If he knows it's lost and it has no siman, obviously he's going to give up hope. But if he doesn't know it, therefore we must be talking about a case that he doesn't know it's lost. That's the chidush, that's the novelty, and he hasn't given up hope yet, and yet this proves Abaye that even if it has a siman or no siman, he's not allowed to keep it. That's what Abaye says, that Yeush Shelo Mida'at lo have Yeush. So according to Abaye, this holds true where the owner had not discovered his loss, and however, Rava would hold this is never true, since he rules that an object cannot be identified, may always be kept by the finder, because eventually he's going to give up hope. But nevertheless, here we have this rule that whether it has a siman or no siman, if you're not allowed to keep it, you're not allowed to keep it, whether it, because there's no dat over here. And therefore that is a tiyufta de Rava, that is a disproof to Rava, tiyufta echeta kavate de Abaye. This finally ends our sugya, that halacha is like Abaye, something that we mentioned way back in the beginning, and this is the ultimate proof.